Hello, my loves, and welcome to episode 111. In this episode, I go quite deeper into my healing journey. And there's a reason why it's called the After Dark episode, because I go into some intimate details about my past that informed my healing journey significantly. And, like I always say, it's time to speak up. It's time to speak out. It's time to be bold. And it's time to really do those uncomfortable things. And I realized that, after podcasting for 3 years, I think I was still holding back. I think I was still hiding. And I think I also don't think it was really time for me to share what I share in this episode. I originally thought that maybe this wouldn't be a family-friendly episode. I'm going to let you use your discretion if you have kids. I just talk about some of my personal things that I haven't really shared before on the episode, or on the podcast, I should say. But I feel like it's really important to speak about these things, to speak about abuse, to speak about things that normally are not spoken about. And it could be because some of us don't even realize that we're being abused, or that we're the abuser, or that we're in a situation that is probably not an ideal situation to be in. So it's always my intention to educate, to help, to create awareness, to create resonance with my listeners, with the intention that you'll hear what I have to say and that you'll be inspired to go out and heal yourself. So stay tuned. Hello, fire goddesses. Welcome to the Reclaim Your Fire podcast. My name is Angela Noel, and I am a prosperity coach for the newly awakened, or awake curious, driven overachiever, and overdoer. After running a successful acupuncture practice in Boston for 12 years, I decided to hang my hat by closing the practice and pursue what it is that I'm really meant to do in this world, and that is to serve humanity online on a global scale. Using my background in Chinese medicine, along with the brain science of habits, spirituality, and divine masculine and feminine energy balance, I am here to help you not just understand, but know how powerful you are, and that you are the person who is responsible for having the finances, inner peace, radiant health, and energy, aka the fire, in your life that you've always desired. My intention with this podcast is to serve humanity, no matter what gender you identify as, to help bring out the divine feminine goddess in each and every one of you. As you probably are already aware, the world is changing and is begging for the goddess to come out in each and every one of you. So, fire goddesses, stay tuned. Hello, my loves, and welcome to another episode of the Reclaim Your Fire podcast. This episode, I truly believe, is probably going to be the most vulnerable and the most important episode that I've ever recorded. And some variation of this episode has been in my head, in my heart, ready to come out for a very long time. And for various reasons, I don't think it was time to release this episode. But it's time. It's time. And I know that earlier when promoting this episode on social media, I said This may not be an episode you want to listen to with your children. We'll see how it goes. It may be just what your children need to hear, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But I feel a little uncomfortable releasing this episode. And that's probably why to this day I have not fully accepted the fact that this needs to come out. But what I know for sure, and I have no doubt about this, is that as a people, if you have a platform of influence, no matter how big or how small, no matter what the platform is, whether it's you just happen to be a few steps ahead of your circle of friends when it comes to your growth, or whether if you have a huge following of millions and millions of people, it's very, very, very important. And I've said this before on the episode, I've said this before in the podcast. It's so important that you speak your truth. And even if you don't have a platform and you're not speaking, it's so very important to heal and to become the highest and best version of yourself. It's so important to be authentic. It's so important to open your heart. It's so very important to learn how to trust yourself and your inner knowing, to develop your intuition and use that as your inner compass, because it is your intuition that knows always and that knows best. And up until now, or up until recently, maybe this message wouldn't have gone too far. I remember actually when maybe in the very, very early stages of, before maybe I even knew exactly what an influencer was, and I don't really identify as an influencer. I don't have a big following. However, there was part of me that knew that I wanted to walk this walk that I'm walking today, to help people step into their power, to be more authentic, and all the things that I talk about on the podcast. I don't need to repeat that. I knew that way back then what my message would be. And I think I even wrote a Facebook post, or I said something to somebody, even maybe it was even before social media. And I remember saying something to the effect of, we have to take personal responsibility for our own lives and for ourselves. And I remember I got criticized for it. I don't remember the context, but I remember I got highly criticized for it. And my point is that even since I've started this podcast, it's been 3 years now, over 3 years, I have seen people grow and evolve so much. I've seen people open their hearts so much. I've seen people be more willing to listen to somebody else who may not agree with their values. And it's been beautiful to witness. I remember there was a time, and using this podcast as an example, that where maybe it wouldn't be appropriate yet to share what I'm going to share tonight. Or maybe I just didn't personally align with it yet because I just wasn't quite there yet. Or maybe somebody would listen to this message and be like, wow, she's got a big chip on her shoulder. And now what I'm seeing is much more willingness to listen and receive these messages and then go out. You know, it's not about, I could care less whether you like me or you don't like me, or if you listen to me or you don't listen to me. What really matters to me is that whoever you receive a message from, whether it be another human or you receive messages from your guides, from the ethers, from dream time, I mean, ideally, all of that guidance that you ever need is within you. That's what I want for all of you, is to receive the guidance so that you know how to trust yourself more and you can guide yourself, because that's the direction we're going in, and it's so freaking exciting. You know, I feel personally like I won the jackpot being alive now, because personally, I feel like I didn't quite belong, I didn't quite belong in society. I just always felt like I never really understood a lot of things that went on in society. And even as a young kid, like I felt very, very sensitive to things that I saw on the news. If my mom and dad were watching the news that night, I couldn't watch it, and I've always felt that way. I just didn't get it, it never made sense to me. And now I get to really show up and do this work for people. I don't mean to toot my own horn here, and I don't really want to ramble on much longer. My whole point is, it is time for each and every one of us to rise up and step into our power. So that's what I'm going to talk about. That's really my intention with doing this episode. But I also feel that in order for me to share how I personally healed, especially, I don't know, in the last 15 to 20 years, but specifically, I would say like the real shift started around 2013 for me personally. I've been walking the spiritual path for much longer than that, kind of subconsciously, but it was right after the Boston Marathon bombing where my whole world fell apart. So what I'm going to share with you is how I healed from all that. And I want to make this, my intention is to make this as relatable as possible. And so in order to do that, I need to be able to share some of the things that happened that got me to this point. And I also want to share that I am so grateful that what happened, because without that being my greatest lesson, which you're going to hear more about, I wouldn't be sitting here today telling this story. And there are no accidents, only lessons. Another thing I want to say is that what I'm going to be talking about might be sensitive to some people who are hearing this. And I want to be very sensitive to that. But like I said earlier, there's no more time to bullshit. There's no time to beat around the bush. We as a people, it's our responsibility. I believe this and I know this in the core of my being. It's our responsibility to heal ourselves. And sometimes when we hear how other people healed and when their stories sound very similar to our stories, then it becomes more relatable and it becomes more okay and inviting for other people to move forward in their life and do the healing work. So I want to say that what I'm going to talk about involves abuse. It's not always going to sound beautiful. I may or may not get emotional, and I may share some really raw stuff with you. And I'm only doing this because I want to help you. Because I feel like the normal narrative that we often hear in society is to brush this stuff away and off to the side. And I did that too. And it's not okay. Abuse is never, ever, ever okay. And also, I want to bring to light that the kind of abuse I'm referring to is more or less a covert abuse. But I also think that it's so common. I don't know the statistics, but I'm willing to bet that many, many people in relationships have experienced this kind of abuse. And I'm not speaking of a physical abuse. I'm not speaking about sexual abuse. I'm not speaking about narcissistic abuse. And I think that's why the abuse that I'm talking about is one that can often be shoved under the rug or unacknowledged because it's kind of it's gray, right? Like, yes, everybody that's experiencing abuse, no matter where it is on the spectrum, because I do think that abuse is also a spectrum, right? And I have friends that are in really tough situations with their abuse, there's so much narcissistic abuse out there. And I feel lucky. I did not encounter narcissistic abuse, but I encountered verbal abuse. And I feel like often a lot of people, especially women, but I know men get abused too. I've witnessed it on both sides, right? And a lot of times it can be so nuanced and so much part of the normal dialogue and conversation and relationships that it's like we mold ourselves to fit in with what's going on in order to feel comfortable, in order to feel like whatever your intention is. I mean, so many people stay in relationships that they should get out of because they feel secure, right? Security, fear. I mean, that was me too. You know, I was with my ex for a very long time, 16 years, I think. And I just want to acknowledge that, you can be a good person. You can be a good soul. I was just sharing this with one of my best friends who I talk to every day. You can be a nice person and you can do nice things for other people and you can be trustworthy and you can be kind, and you can also be very conflicted inside. So this isn't my intention to attack another human being. In fact, it's a human being that I, to this day, still care a lot about and will always care for. But you can be a kind person and still be very conflicted inside if you choose not to work on your trauma. If you are not the person in your family line that decides that you are the person who's going to end ancestral whatever, abuse, trauma, habits, money abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, narcissistic abuse, or whatever the toxic trait is, that is not you, you are basically the person who is allowing it to continue in your ancestry, meaning you're going to pass it along to your children. So you need to do the work. You need to heal. And that is why I'm doing this series. So that is why I'm bringing on these people who are my brothers and sisters who have gone through really tough challenges and situations. And they brought their whole heart in to this series, and I'm so grateful to each and every one of them for sharing, often so vulnerably, their story so publicly. And that is all I'm doing here. So I can't tell you how many times I've talked to my girlfriends, people in my family, people that I know and love, who have been in similar situations that I have. And like me, they just brushed it aside. And they said, oh, well, so-and-so is moody, or so-and-so has an anger streak, or so-and-so gets testy sometimes. And that was definitely me, although I'm going to share something with you. And thank you so much to my soul brother who really, he was the messenger that said, you really need to talk about this. You need to get real about this, and you know who you are. I remember the first time I felt that criticism. and how it felt in my body. And I'll never forget it because it was a feeling that came up every single time my ex-husband spoke to me using a certain tone. So let me just backtrack a little bit, okay? Just so you have a little more context. In my marriage, my ex-husband was verbally abusive, and mainly it showed up as being overly critical. Overly critical. And then it was accompanied by anger streaks, angry outbursts, which got worse with drinking alcohol. And I feel like I need to share this, A, so that you not only have some context, but B, because I know this is relatable. I know I'm not alone here. I know that there are so many people out there that can relate to this relationship dynamic. And I felt that I was often walking on eggshells for that whole 16 years of being involved with this person. And it affected, I believe, and I'm not blaming anybody. I want to make that perfectly clear because this is my dharma. This is my karma, and this was a lesson. And if it wasn't for being in this relationship and having this karma, I needed to learn this lesson because what I needed to do was learn how to be in my personal power, which I'm going to get to later. But I often felt helpless, and I felt like anything I did, because this is what happens with verbal abuse, okay? And it's often a big dynamic. This is a dynamic that happens in a codependent relationship too. You don't need to have alcohol involved with codependency. I was codependent. And it's still a trait that I find myself still noticing, with the people pleasing and feeling like I need to explain myself and do the right thing in order to make other people happy, right? That's codependency. That's just to scratch the surface. Codependency, as far as I'm concerned, is a disease that comes out of a lack of self-worth and self-love, which so many people have. But I felt like very rarely anything that I did was right. And if I made a mistake, it made me very, very uncomfortable to talk about with my ex-spouse, because often it was met with, well, what were you thinking? What's wrong with you? What are you doing? And the tone and those words, if you are an empath especially, and if you are a codependent, those words can be devastating. It always feels like I did something wrong. And I often felt like I needed to explain myself. And then when I did that, it's like no amount of explaining. You can't, right? One of my mentors says, if you argue with an idiot, it proves that you are too. And I'm not saying that my ex is an idiot, but when we are in idiotic states, when you try to argue with somebody, you're not going to get anywhere, right? Like for those of you who are in narcissistic relationships, you know that, right? Like you can't ever argue with a narcissist. And I do believe, by the way, that we are all on the spectrum of narcissism. Like we all have a little bit of it in us, within us. Luckily for me, I don't feel that my relationship was overly narcissistic, but I do think there were elements. There was definitely the gaslighting, like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, that's classic gaslighting. And I heard that a lot. Or, you're crazy, And I know that it was really, really painful to my family, who I'm really, really close with, my mom, my dad, my sister, because they witnessed it and they were able to really just keep their mouth shut. Once in a while it would come up, or if I would ask them, what did you think about what just happened, for example? And they'd be like, well, we find that to be really painful, that you're being spoken to that way. But I just want to reiterate that it's been such a blessing because, as I said earlier in this episode, that we need to be able to stand in our personal power more than ever. And if it wasn't for this, I don't know where I would be, honestly. I mean, maybe the lesson would have showed up in a different place through a different person, but I'm so grateful for this lesson. But during that time, it was no joke. I found myself always self-correcting and wondering if I'm cutting the tomatoes correctly and cutting the onions correctly. And if I was going to be, when the next time was going to be that I was going to be criticized. And for me, because I'm kinesthetic, right? I'm kinesthetic, I'm also auditory, and I'm also visual, but I think I'm really kinesthetic, meaning I experience so much of my life experiences in my body, right? I often felt like I was being punched in the gut. So when I was criticized, I felt like it was literally a punch in the gut, like somebody literally came and punched me in the solar plexus. Like I felt it in my solar plexus. And it often, when you get scared, when you have a fright, right? Like the British say, oh, you gave me such a fright. So it's that feeling. It was a punch in the gut, and then this residual nervous system response where my whole nervous system just lit up, right? It was a fight or flight response. So there was that. And then I talked about how I was always on eggshells. And then also just, I lost my libido. I know that every couple is different. Some couples do really well with that and have make-up sex, and that's how they work things out. But for me, I am a freezer. I've learned, thanks to the holistic psychologist, I've learned that my traumatic response, my primary traumatic response is freezing. So my body shut down. I did not have any desire to have sex. I had no libido. And I just became sort of used to this numb way of being. It's the best way I can describe it. I don't know how often I laughed or how often I know that I repressed my feelings a lot. I didn't cry a lot because, it was very vulnerable and uncomfortable, and I never felt like I could ever, it eats away at your self-worth, right? So I felt like everything that I said was never good enough or conveying how I truly felt. And I definitely repressed crying, and then until I would just explode. Now, if you know me now, you know that I cry all the time. I consider it a superpower, and I consider it who I truly am. And then one of the reasons why I feel that everybody should listen to this, not just women, but men too, is because if you want to be in an intimate relationship with somebody and you're verbally abusing them or you're abusing them, oftentimes for people who go into freeze mode, if that's their trauma response, they're not going to want to have sex with you. It's like that trust gets lost. And that's what happened with me. And I just basically felt like an empty shell. And I remember going to bed and just feeling, night after night after night, I just remember thinking, all right, another night of feeling like this empty shell. And when I started to not recognize myself anymore, when I didn't laugh that much anymore, when I didn't smile, like if I'm a very, very vivacious, happy person, and that's how I've always been. And to feel this way and just feel completely shut down for many, 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 many years, I think about the toll that it took on my health. And I am one of those people, I'm very blessed because I'm a healthcare practitioner and I had a very extensive network when I lived in Boston. I knew a lot of practitioners. And so I took really good care of myself. I did a lot of acupuncture during that time. I went to the chiropractor all the time. I went to therapy, which, by the way, didn't help at all. I mean, I know that there's some therapy that's better than others, but I'll share later what actually worked for me personally. But for me, therapy just made me feel worse because it was just, I would go in there and just talk about everything that happened. And I'm like, how is that helping? I'm not a really big fan of therapy. I know it helps a lot of people, but I did all the things. I guess that's what I'm trying to drive home is that I did all the things that I feel very lucky that I had those opportunities to be worked on like that, to have Reiki and to have craniosacral and to get massages on a regular basis. I did all those things. And I've always been kind of a health nut. So I always ate really clean at home. But when we talked about this when Jason and I talked about this in episode, what was that now? 109? I believe. Is that correct? Or 108? When Jason and I talked about how, you can have the healthiest health habits in the world, but if you're not managing your emotions, if you're not managing yourself, your trauma, if you're not releasing stuck emotion in Chinese medicine, that's the biggest cause of disease is stuck emotion, right? There's a reason why the word emotion is associated with emotion, because emotions are here to inform us about what we need to work on, and then we release them. We don't hang on to emotion. That's when we get sick. That's when we get cancer. That's when we get diseases. And, probably most Western doctors are not going to tell you that, but Eastern medicine backs that up. And Eastern medicine is 4,000 years old now. So that's what happened. And I luckily consider myself very healthy, but I think about, how did that take, what toll did it take on my kidney chi and my adrenal glands and my thyroid and my hormones to be constantly in this fight or flight state, to always be feeling like I wasn't doing enough, to always be feeling like, who knows when I'm going to be criticized next. And in my acupuncture practice and even in my coaching practice today, I still continue to see these kinds of cases where these women show up as just shells of themselves. Maybe they're looking the part, maybe they have the perfect athletic body and they're wearing the perfect Lululemon outfits or, the perfect clothing, and they could be dressed to the nine, but they're dying inside. And that's basically what's happening if you don't heal yourself. If you don't own what's going on with yourself and speak up. And I just want to say, side note, if you are being physically abused, if your life is in danger, there are so many places that you can go for help. So many places where you can go for help. So definitely, depending on where you're listening to this, check out, you can always call 911, or there's plenty of hotlines you could call and ask for help. Somebody was just telling me yesterday, I interviewed a pet sitter yesterday, and she was telling me that now correct me if I'm wrong, but the Jewish communities are really helpful if you need any kind of help at all. And there was a name she used for it. So if you know what I'm talking about, please reach out and let me know. But, there's communities, there's churches, there's so many people who can help you. But for those of you that are in relationships where you have an opportunity to stand in your power right now, the time is to do it right now. Right now. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. I just want to make sure that I've covered everything that I wanted to talk about concerning the abuse. I think I did. I think I covered everything. You know, I want to mention a couple things and then I'll move on. When the people that you love who really do their best to be supportive and keep their mouth shut start saying things, I think that's really an opportunity to pay attention. Of course, we do have our own will and our free will, and we have our own personal power, and we can always choose, right? But when you start to hear that message more than once, like for me, I heard it more than once. It's not like a lot of people said it to me because, my ex, he's a very likable person. He's funny, he's fun, he has a great sense of humor, he's a good man. But we all know at this point that, like I said earlier, you can be a kind soul and still have your baggage. And if you don't know how to deal with your baggage and it's coming out as anger or criticism, because that's just a reflection of yourself. If you're abusing another person, that's just a reflection of your pain, right? And I have a feeling that I'm talking to not just the abusees right now, but I'm talking to abusers. Maybe you don't even know that you're being abused or that you're the abuser, right? That is my intention, is to wake people the fuck up so that they have awareness, and then to offer some tools in this podcast so that you can heal. So I say this all the time in the podcast. If you're not happy with the way the world is looking right now, there's really only one thing that you can do, and that's to heal yourself. And it's nobody's responsibility except for yourself. Like, even as I share my story, I want to be perfectly clear that I take full responsibility for my life and my journey and for what happened. I'm not pointing any fingers, but that is the first thing. You need to take responsibility for your life. If you're not happy where you are, you have free will and you can change it, okay? And even if it's, some people are like, well, Angela, I live in a third world country. I can't afford to hire a coach, or I can't afford certain things. So what you're saying to me, though, is because you live in a third world country, you don't have the power to work on your mind. Am I right about that? So you have so many opportunities, especially now, if you have a phone and if your phone connects to the internet. If you have a library and your computer, the library has computers, you have that opportunity to go online and see for yourself how you can work on yourself right now. And just take baby steps, okay? And I'm going to give you some steps. A lot of what I share with you later on is not going to be about things that you buy. It's ways of being, right? As we slowly move out of the matrix, the old world, and move into the new earth, you're going to start to discover that the way that society has been run for however long it's been run is no longer working. You don't need to have all the things in order to do the thing, right? So much of what you can do costs no money and can be very, very empowering. And I really feel very called to mention this, because this to me was a big, big sign. There's a couple things here. When I looked at my mom and dad, and I saw how my mom and dad, even though they fight, how they respect each other and listen to each other. And I realized that I didn't have that in my relationship. That to me was a sign that there's something off. And it used to really, it was so hurtful to know this truth, and then to know that I actually had to face this truth and do something about it. And the other thing that I'm going to say is that, in high school and even in college, I always had a lot of, I had a lot of friends, a lot of male friends. And some of us are still in touch, but a lot of people I've lost touch with, not because I got married or anything, but basically, life just happens, right? But I remember I had this group of friends, specifically these guys I knew from high school, and then we hung out probably all throughout college. When I would go home to visit, we would all hang out, and they were like my buddies, and I could say anything to them, and I could be as goofy as I wanted to. And if I felt like dancing around and throwing my, head banging and throwing my hair around or being really silly, I could do that. And I didn't totally feel that way with my ex. So I also want to mention that, because I know this is a common thing, is that when you are with somebody that you feel like you can't be yourself around, and you're noticing, oh my God, like my best friend Bob and I could say anything to these guys from high school, anything at all. And even my friends today, male, female, my really, really close friends, I don't have that many as I used to, but I can say anything to them at any time, and I know that I won't be judged and I'll only be loved. So that was also a sign to me that it just kind of wore away at me over time. But I wanted to mention that because I know that could also be really relatable. So if you listen to episode 107, My Story Part 1, I basically talked about the big theme in that episode was about letting go and surrendering and trusting and basically peeling the layers of letting go and detaching. And so you already know that story. And if you haven't heard it yet, then I invite you to go back and listen to episode 107, where I talk about that part of my healing journey. But what I want to share with you in this episode, because you already know, in case you didn't listen, basically what happened later on is I was so unhappy. Again, I realize it's a choice, but I was so unhappy, and I knew that I needed to do something to get back to my authentic self, to get to my higher being, to get to my higher vibrational self, to become who I truly am. And I really felt like I needed help with that. And I hired coaches. That's when I really started to just become more bold with my financial decisions and just hire. If I needed something, I hired them out. And I had a couple of one-to-one coaches, and then I joined a few coaching programs, and they were life-changing. For me, that was my vehicle to freedom. Now, if I was in this situation at this point in my life now, would I have done it differently? I can't really speak to that. But for me, hiring a coach and then working in a group setting and having a community of people, of like-minded people, really helped with my healing. But as you know, I went into debt, and I didn't tell my ex because he thought self-help was kind of crazy and didn't believe in it and didn't believe in even therapy. I don't think he really stood behind that. So I needed to do this, and I needed to do this on the down low. So I didn't tell him. And I ended up going into a fair amount of debt, which I paid off all my debt early this year. But talk about a burden, right? So there was the burden of knowing that, even subconsciously, my soul knew that I needed to be free. And then I had this debt that I was, carrying around. So it was really, really, for those people who are dealing with burnout or adrenal fatigue, I invite you really, or any illness for that matter, and you consider yourselves doing really well in all the healthy habit type things, and you're still sick, there might be a reason why, and it could be because of blocked emotion, because of unresolved trauma, and because of hiding, right? And I was a big, 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 big hider. Oh my God, I hid and hid. I'd rather just bury myself in the sand than deal with my shit. And it caught up with me eventually. I had I went through a phase of adrenal fatigue, I think at least one time. Definitely depression, anxiety. I feel definitely like I am blessed. I am lucky that I always knew that I was healthy. Even though I had these things going on, I always knew that I was healthy, and I believed that about myself. But not everybody is lucky, right? And that is another reason why it's just so important to learn to be in your personal power. So I want to segue into the next part of this episode, and that is how I healed. And really, I use the term personal power because it's all encompassing. It covers everything when it comes to healing. So some people think about standing in your power as, well, you set a boundary, or you say no, or you learn how to ask a lot of questions when you feel like you need questions answered. Like, how many people don't do that because they're afraid that they're going to be considered annoying or pesty, right? It's doing what you need to do and being the person that you need to be to serve your highest self. Okay, so we have our lower selves and our higher selves, right? Human design talks about this. The highest version of ourselves is who we truly are. It's who we are when we incarnated. It's who our soul knows. Our soul knows who we truly are. Our soul knows all, right? And when we come into 3D ego consciousness, all the conditioning and the programming and all the things that we hear from parenting, our parents, and from society, from the news, from politics, from religion, those beliefs tend to shrink us and make us small. Hopefully not for much longer, because you're doing the work and you're healing, right? And you're going to know the difference between what somebody is telling you to do and is your truth and your own inner truth. So basically, personal power is about knowing yourself and knowing your inner truth and trusting that no matter what. So, I've been talking about this with my friend and I. We brainstorm often, and we're like, okay, how can you explain the healing journey of healing from divorce in a few short sentences? And if I'm going to keep it really short, I'd say you need to learn how to stand in your personal power. But how do you do that, right? So for me personally, I'm sharing my journey here. It definitely was not something that happened overnight, and it definitely is something that you need to make a choice to be committed to. And also giving yourself plenty of grace and forgiveness and love if you mess up. Like, we're humans. Sometimes we mess up. Like, sometimes I just want to have something that I know might not be good for me later on. Like, right now, alcohol is just not agreeing with my system, but sometimes I just want to drink, and then I deal with that. So it's not about beating ourselves up if we mess up or if we do something that makes us feel less, not as great later on. If we hook up with somebody that we we regret the next morning. You know what I'm saying, right? So it's about giving ourselves plenty of space to be a human being and live as a human being with regard and with the intention of raising our vibration and becoming who we truly are. So for me personally, I would say that my life really changed and turned around when I adopted spirituality into my life. And I'd say that it really started to become appealing to me, I think, with the Celestine Prophecy when I read that book, which was, I don't know, long time now, maybe 15 to 20 years ago I read that book, and then Conversations with God and certain books like that really got me started. And then my mom always had a lot of Wayne Dyer's books, so I read those. And The New Earth, I think my mom had that book, and then she gave it to me. And then Marianne Williamson, I can't say I resonate with her, but I remember around 2013, or maybe around 2012, I started following Gabby Bernstein. And I feel like Gabby is the entryway to spirituality for a lot of people. So, for me, it was about listening to influencers speak about spirituality. Carolyn Mace was another big one, especially way before Gabby Bernstein. I was listening to Carolyn Mace. So, it's about finding people that have a message that you resonate with, and just go on YouTube and start listening away, listen to podcasts. And meanwhile, all the while, just being really impeccable with how you're taking care of your vessel, your body, your meat suit, right? How are you taking care of your mind? What are you letting in, right? So, as recently as a year ago, I was really, really into thriller movies. I love a good thriller. And I probably still could stomach like a good Liam Neeson thriller, or, Michael Douglas thriller or something like that. But, the older guys, I love them. But now I notice myself turning on the TV and there's very little that I can stomach. Like, I find myself gravitating towards rom-coms and basically even like religious movies with a religious theme to them, even though I'm not religious, I'm not dogmatic, but because they're light, because that's what my system can handle. So what I would recommend for you in gaining your personal power is to pay attention how things feel in your body. So that goes back to the abuse I was talking about. Like for me personally, my system didn't agree with being talked to that way. Like maybe, I don't know, I think it requires getting really truthful with yourself and figuring out what's going to work for you and what feels good to you and what feels awful to you, and getting honest. For me, when I always knew that felt shitty, like being overly criticized all the time felt shitty in my body. And with the intention of gaining your personal power, it's really important to learn how to trust yourself. Trust yourself. You don't trust anybody else when it comes to your healing journey. I mean, yes, if you go see an acupuncturist or if you go see a healer that you really like, yes, by all means, get the help that you need from the outside. But when it comes to your inner truth, nobody else is going to create that for you besides yourself. So for me, that's something I would say really started to become clear, like in the last year or so, and then especially since I moved to Sedona. Because Sedona is like such an intense, energetic place. It's such a gift. Like if you want to heal, it's such a good place to come and heal, because the energy brings on all the shadows that you need to heal. And a lot of people, you might have heard about shadow work because it's kind of a buzzword. I notice a lot of influencers are talking about shadow work again. Shadow work's really important. It's really, really necessary to do shadow work in order to heal. And, shadow work is about, this came up for me today. How does it feel? How does it feel in my body? How does it feel in my emotions? And just sitting with that instead of judging it, right? A lot of times when we get into our triggers or get into our shadows, it can be really, really, really uncomfortable. And it's not to say that there's anything wrong with reacting to it, because sometimes that happens, right? It's just, it's how so many people are wired, right? Is to be reactive. Like, oh no, like this feels horrible. Let me escape, or let me judge, or let me, do something to take away the pain. Let me drink more. Let me go out shopping more. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention earlier in the episode, but one of my coping mechanisms that I developed when I was in my trauma response from the abuse was shopping. I never was a serial, like I'd spend, like I got in lots and lots and lots of trouble. But for somebody who was in debt and shopped more than she should have, like that's not a great combination. So I definitely noticed that when I was feeling stuck, that was one of the ways that I froze. is I'd go shopping, online shopping. Sometimes just to get out of the house, I would go shopping too. I'd go to, TJ Maxx or Target or something like that. And just because it was a way to keep my mind off of things instead of dealing with everything head on. And another thing I want to say too is that there's nothing wrong sometimes with just using, like say, watching a movie or something, or using distraction tactics to not numb out, but just to kind of move away from this process sometimes, because healing is a lot of work, and it doesn't always feel good. And that's why a lot of people choose not to do it. That's why a lot of people jump off the bandwagon and stop doing the healing work, because it's hard sometimes. And I use that word with intention. It's uncomfortable sometimes. And to do the healing work, you need to be uncomfortable. And it's not something like, like I went and saw a healer and I'm all healed, right? You got to continue to do the work. And so the shadows are going to keep coming up. And even today, and for the rest of my time on earth in this body, I am going to be doing healing work, because we're always going deeper. There's always the opportunity to go deeper and peel layers of the onion. So shadow work, listening to your body, nourishing your body, getting all the sleep, doing all the healthy habits, exercise, that goes without saying. That's a way to strengthen your personal power muscle. Boundary setting, of course, right? Learn how to set boundaries. Learn how to be comfortable with disappointing somebody, okay? Learn to be comfortable with choosing yourself over somebody else. Learn to be comfortable with saying, I am no longer available for people pleasing. Because really, if you're a people pleaser, and I'm a recovering people pleaser. I don't consider myself as much of one anymore, and I had to heal from that. But if you're a people pleaser and somebody is disappointed with you because of a choice you made, that's not on you. That's on them, right? That's just a reflection of them if they get reactive. And that is something I would say that's one of the biggest things I learned from in my marriage, was about people pleasing and ending people pleasing. Like if my ex was reactive or not happy with something, that was not about me. And once I stopped reacting to him, and once I stopped giving him the space to criticize or do whatever he did, abuse, whatever, that basically stopped dead in its tracks. So there's some real power in, whether you're on the verge of a divorce, whether you're really trying to stay with the person that you're with. I mean, side note, I can't tell you how many people I know that are divorcing because of this. I mean, I don't know, maybe like attracts like, but I do think that there is this rising of the divine feminine energy that's really remarkable to see, because the feminine is we're freaking goddesses, right? And we each have that goddess energy within us. And when the masculine is wounded and holding on to its woundedness, it's just not going to work, right? So I also want to acknowledge the masculine, and whether I'm talking about a man or just that wounded masculine, right? They need to heal just as much as we do, okay? But I do believe that for many women specifically, when we do the healing work and people see us and see how good we're doing and how good we're feeling, and if you're into like the whole manifestation thing, like what you're manifesting, how much money you're manifesting and material items. I mean, I've kind of changed my tune about that. Those things are absolutely nice to have. But more importantly is about your way of being first. And then all that stuff seriously just falls into your lap. It's really, really incredible. So that's another reason to heal if you're struggling, is manifestation. When you are in the vibration of the things that you desire, it's like effortless to attract money, to attract an incredible lover, to attract your dream home, or whatever it is that you desire. So another reason why that's important, and that's another thing that I really do as part of my healing and gaining my personal power, is I'm working on my vibration every single day. And I do that through meditation. I do that through rituals, like habits that I do every day. And I do that with consistency, discipline, and commitment. Like, those are my three words when it comes to, the 3D, having success in the 3D is commitment, consistency, and discipline. And it's something that I'm working on every single day. I'm not a naturally disciplined, committed, or consistent person, but I now have that in my identity, that's who I am. Those are the words that I always go back to when I am struggling with my habits or with certain things that I need to do that make me feel like I'm moving the needle forward and get me into that higher vibration so that I feel like I am healing. So another thing I'm going to mention, with gaining personal power, so much of it is letting old relationships go. Old friendships, sometimes sadly, it's with family members. Any relationship that you have that doesn't feel good. And I want to talk about this a little bit, because so many times I feel like this is kind of backwards, the way a lot of this stuff is taught. People say, well, that person is just so toxic. I need to let go of this person. But if somebody is toxic, one thing to keep in mind is that person's toxicity could be reflecting, because we're always mirroring each other, right? We're here on this earth to grow and evolve, and we're all reflecting and mirroring each other all the time. So if you have a toxic person in your life, that's always an opportunity to look at yourself and say, and see, maybe there's some kind of toxic trait that you need to work on. Or maybe there's something about this person that's present in yourself that you don't want to see, that you need to work on. So I want to just also hone that in, because I feel like when you talk about toxicity in people, often it's from kind of almost a victim-y standpoint and not from an empowered standpoint. And when you're gaining your personal power, you always want to be empowered. You want to make choices that come from power and not from your victimhood. And oftentimes, I've seen this shift in my relationships, like with, my closest relationships, where when I stand in my personal power, the toxicity kind of melts away. And if it starts to show up again, that's always an opportunity for me to set the boundary, or maybe just to lovingly have a conversation with my loved one and say, listen, I understand how you feel. A lot of times what's required is compassion, right? Like, this person just wants to be heard, wants to be felt. But you can also, if the person continues to do it, it's an opportunity for you to be like, listen, I don't want to tolerate, I'm not going to tolerate this kind of talk anymore. So if you continue to say those things, then I'm going to walk away, or something like that. That's a tactic that I used to do with my ex toward the end of the relationship. And it worked for a little while. But with other people, the other thing is you can only be an example to other people. You can't tell them to heal. You can't force them to heal. The only thing that you can do is change yourself. And that's why I talk about, in order for the world to change, we need to change. And I really, truly believe that by us doing the healing work, it's going to create the ripple effect for other people. It's going to make other people see, well, look at the results that she's getting. I can do that too. I want that for myself too. I want that for my family too. I want that for my kids too, right? So there's so many beautiful benefits, and I've just witnessed so many blessings as a result of truly standing in my power. So let me see, is there anything else to share with you? I mean, really, it's about being consistent with this work every day and being committed and disciplined. I can't emphasize that enough. And, some days, I want to drink a certain amount of water every day. And some days I don't get it all in, right? Some days I don't always get my exercise in. Like I have my habit list, my things that I want to do every day. Sometimes I don't get it all in. Sometimes I don't always get all of my meditation stuff in. And it's about really just having grace and listening to your body. Your body always is going to know what it needs. Like there's days, especially living in Sedona, where the best thing I can do for myself is rest and eat really healthy. Stay in my apartment and make a really healthy meal that feels very nourishing, and that's enough, Another thing too that I find really important to do is just to love more and to be committed to opening up your heart and allowing yourself to feel, and to, even if the emotions are uncomfortable, right? That's just going to allow more love in, especially, this journey is all about self-love, but when you love yourself, you're more likely to find, if you're looking for a partner, you're more likely to find that partner that is more in balance and shares similar values as you. And I guess the last thing I want to end this with is, when it comes to personal power, probably the most important thing that you can do for yourself is to manage your energy. And I believe that everything that I just talked about up till this point can help you with managing your energy. But, if you're feeling like you're giving too much of your energy away, if you're feeling tired, if you're feeling like there's certain things that are just exhausting you, that's something for you to pay attention to. Like that's just your body telling you that you need to make some changes. And that's all that it's about, right? I'll give an example. I'm in the process of some major transactions. I can't really talk about it right now. But so many of these things, these steps that I need to do in order to do this transaction requires me going into the unknown and doing things I've never done before. So it involves like researching and reading about things and learning more about things and asking a lot of questions and all the things. And today I just had I just broke down. I was so exhausted and so tired. And I started crying, and I was just so frustrated with the way this was going. And when you get into that point, when you just become kind of a hot mess, like that's your body telling you, like, you need to do something. You need to go out and ground yourself. You need to go for a walk. Maybe you need to go lay down for a little while. Maybe you just need to go breathe. The solution is often very, very simple. It doesn't have to be very complicated. But it is very, very important to maintain your personal power by managing your energy and not getting sucked into what's on the news. Yes, of course, be informed, do the things, read whatever you need to read, but be mindful about what you're consuming. Be mindful about what you're listening to. Be mindful about the types of people that you're letting in your life. This all influences your energy and your vibration. So master your energy. Master your energy. Do not give your power away to anybody ever. Ever, 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 ever. And that is why it's so important to learn how to trust yourself and to learn how to know your inner truth always. So this is probably one of the longer podcasts I've done. I'm already over an hour. I have to edit it and everything, but I hope that you found this helpful. If you are listening and maybe found this to be a little shocking or uncomfortable to hear, just know that it is my intention always to share information that is going to help you. And I just knew that it was time for me to share. It's for whatever reason, we tend to protect our abusers, and that's not right. Because we worry that we're going to ruin their reputation or whatever. But when you speak from your heart and you speak from your truth with the intention of sharing so that other people can heal too, you're going to help change the world. And that's how the world is going to change. And I knew that I just couldn't stay quiet anymore. I needed to show up. I needed to speak. I needed to speak about my feelings and the whole healing process. So Any questions about anything, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Instagram, as you know, at i.am.angela.noel. And any takeaways, please feel free to screenshot this podcast, post it on Instagram and tag me so more and more people can hear about this. I just feel that it's no longer acceptable to normalize abuse. It's no longer acceptable. I'm going to say this over and over again. It's no longer acceptable to normalize abuse of any kind. What is needed in order to stop this cycle is to heal, is to be in our personal power. And this kind of abuse that I referred to in this episode, I know is common. I said it before, and I'm going to say it again, just like Ferris Bueller. It is common, and people need to talk about it. There's no need to be ashamed. There's no need to hide from this. Let's talk about it. Let's get the help that we need. Let's heal so that the world can be a better place, okay? I love you so much. Thank you for listening. And remember to be radiant, be powerfully authentic, and know that you can reclaim your fire at any time. Good night, good afternoon, good morning. Take care. Hi, this is Angela Noel, and thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you have found value in listening to this podcast, I would be so grateful if you could kindly share this podcast with those you care about. Please help me spread the word of empowerment and possibility and expansion by sharing this podcast. Or you could also leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Remember to follow me on Instagram at IamAngelaNoel, or you could go to my website at www.angelanoelinternational.com to learn more about my work and to find out how you can work with me. Thank you very much.